Everyone, welcome to the webinar. My name is Manish Sharma. I'm your host today for this webinar, and I have with me Betsy Summers. Welcome, Betsy. How are you doing?
Great, thank you. Excited to be here.
So Betsy Summers is a principal analyst at Forrester Research, and we are going to talk about her in a little bit. But let me get started by talking about this very exciting topic that we have today. So our agenda is embracing change, the mindset shift for HR in the age of Gen AI. This is a very hot topic. This is a topic that brings different emotions from different folks. And today we are going to, with the help of my guest speaker, Betsy, we are going to sort through this topic and figure out what it means for different stakeholders, what the future maybe look like, and what it means for all of us. In the agenda, we are going to talk about understanding the need for change, why change, the expectations of employee supports, how these are changing, and I think that sometimes go beyond HR, to be honest. What is generative AI and what kind of cultural shift it is bringing in enterprises? What are the use cases of AI in HR? What is the patterns that we are seeing emerging? What are the benefits and challenges in implementing? If you go ahead and implement something like this, what does it mean? What can you expect in your journey as you go along? And we what is the risk and opportunities, right? All of these things present an opportunity, but also present a risk. How do we navigate through the risk and to get the benefits that we are all looking for? Towards the end, I'm going to add a little bit of product perspective from my side on what Rezolve.ai does in this space. But let me again get started by welcoming everyone else who has joined and welcoming Betsy as well. So Betsy is a principal analyst and future of work team at Forrester. She specializes in human capital management. Betsy, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Yes, happy to. So the majority of my conversations, of course, are with business leaders and corporate leaders, government as well, about how work is changing, the nature of work, how the workforce is changing. And most recently, our conversations are about AI. People are curious about how it's going to change jobs, how they can leverage it inside their technology stacks and their tools to help build more capabilities for productivity and employee experience, et cetera. So just as maybe 2 years ago, we were talking a lot more about things like the Great Resignation and compensation and recruitment and retention. Now our conversations are really full of AI and everything about AI, and especially generative AI with its more expansive capabilities. So I'm excited to talk today about what we have found at Forrester and the nature of our conversations as well, specific to the HR function, and explore a little bit more about what we found in terms of your decision framework for bringing in certain use cases, what use cases are most popular, and just helping you kind of build the ship while it's sailing, because we're all in this together, learning across this big question of how Gen AI is going to change our work and how to navigate it successfully.
No, I'm so excited. I'm so excited about this session because, a comprehensive discussion on this, while, all of us have talked a little bit here and a little bit there, but I think a comprehensive discussion on this topic is very much warranted. So welcome again, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can share your screen. And let's hear the presentation.
Wonderful. All right. So first off, when we survey, and of course at Forrester we do a lot of surveys, when we survey leaders about what kind of impact on the workforce they think generative AI will make, there are some really big numbers in terms of just how significantly it's going to change the business. So we asked them, in what ways is Gen AI going to change these natures of your business? 88% said it's going to change how employees do day-to-day work. 81% say it's going to change how the market and competitive environment develop. 81% again say it's going to change their need for governance and regulatory compliance mechanisms, and 79% say it's going to change what products and services they bring to market. These are really big numbers. There's a huge number of executives who really think and imagine that Gen AI is going to bring big change. And certainly from a day-to-day perspective, I agree. I think it depends on the functions, but we are seeing a future in which your org chart might look significantly different. So as you think about the way that you manage and structure your team with generative AI and its capabilities to help with productivity, content generation, content authoring, editing, even the conversational interface and experience from a kind of bot perspective, we could see a future where we have an org chart that actually has bots in the seats where we would typically have people. And on one hand, that is incredibly exciting from a kind of experimentation and imagination perspective, and certainly from an efficiencies and productivity perspective, but it also brings alongside it a lot of fear. A lot of fear about, is my job going to be replaced by generative AI? How will my job change because of generative AI? And all of the things in between of how will my employee experience change? How will my career path change, et cetera? And it's true that for as many jobs as we forecast will be replaced by generative AI, and that's the light green bars that you can see, the vast majority, 4.5 times that number, will actually just be changed. Those will be influenced. So it's almost like thinking there will only be a subset of jobs in your organizations that will be wholly replaced or could have the opportunity to be replaced wholly by generative AI and its capabilities. But the vast majority, almost everyone else's jobs, will be changed in some way because of generative AI. And that brings in a lot of questions about, how are you going to change your workforce planning? How are you going to change your job descriptions? How are you going to change the way that people are hired, interviewed, vetted, assessed, qualified for positions based on this new skill and this new component of the workforce that we're bringing in? And so almost for the HR department and function, this is a kind of dual burden, because not only are you helping people figure out what's going to change about their job, but your job is going to change as well. So these peeling the onion back in these forecasts, we look at all of the roles and titles, and we use ONET for our forecast just to provide more of the foundational framework for what jobs and roles exist. And so based on some of these human resource roles, right, we can look at the tasks and components of their jobs and what will overlap with generative AI. And so that's where you can see the generative AI influence of the percentage of that person's role description as defined by ONET. What percentage of that actually could be taken over, overlapped, intersected in some way with generative AI? And so for each of these components or functions of HR, compensation, general kind of business partner, manager, specialists, training and development, so like learning and development, we can see significant change coming for those particular roles. So this is just kind of an example of how each of the roles within HR will change, but they will also have to help the entire organization navigate through this change. And that's that kind of dual or double burden that HR will shoulder. And it comes at a time also of a lot of excitement as well about the productivity or employee experience benefits that Gen AI can bring. And certainly just AI in general, as we've seen through natural language processing and a lot of the LLM work, there are a lot of possibilities for AI to help both enable productivity, which certainly HR cares about from a kind of workforce performance perspective. It can help them clarify the insights. So a lot of the conversation about HR needing to get better at analytics or their kind of data skills, Gen AI can help a lot with that, because certainly AI is great at identifying patterns, but Gen AI can also feed that kind of those insights back to HR in a conversational way to help them really close the gap that they might have in their data and analytics maturity as a function. And then third, it can really help scale growth opportunities in a way that certainly technology helps us scale things. So using any kind of technology is typically better than doing things on a spreadsheet, as we know from managing skills or managing career paths, creating and managing learning paths. There's tons of use cases, right, for how technology can help scale a lot of those programs and practices. But when you apply AI, and certainly generative AI, into those use cases, then the ability to scale and also just respond to the dynamism of human beings, right? We are always growing, we're always changing, our skills are changing, what we're working on is always changing, and we need AI's capabilities to kind of learn and grow and seek out patterns and keep building and learning on itself to mimic or mirror the way that we are growing kind of dynamically as human beings, and then scale and recommend different opportunities to us based on that. So it's an opportunity equity conversation as well, like it's a visibility conversation too in the organization, but it provides a lot of possibilities for self-service when it comes to those use cases that are usually kind of depending on how much time your manager has, or depending on how large your HR function is, or how involved your HR business partner might be, an employee might not get career advice or career growth paths or various learning opportunities or learning paths, even from an e-learning perspective, coaching, upskilling and reskilling recommendations. These are all the things that Gen AI can actually step in and provide. Given the right data set, it can actually help scale a lot of those experiences. And so this is the kind of the possibility side of AI, bringing it into more of the HR function, or at least enabling HR to deliver these capabilities. But even while they're also having to navigate the huge changes that Gen AI might bring from a workforce perspective. So they have to hold both of those things almost in parallel. And we're definitely going to talk about that. First, I want to dive more deeply into some of these use cases. So these are some of the bigger benefits of, enabling productivity, clarifying insights, and scaling growth opportunities. And here are some kind of further framing devices or kind of categories of all of these use cases, because there are hundreds of use cases of and for HR. They serve various personas along the top. So HR administrators, also use cases specifically for managers, and then use cases for the general workforce. Those types of use cases fall into the general categories that we see in most Gen AI use cases, right? So content production, inquiry response, so it's that kind of conversational nature of Gen AI, the insight generation, so being able to analyze, interpret, recognize patterns, and kind of help you understand the story and what the data is saying. And then system administration, so analyzing data streams, workflows, pointing out errors, any kind of gaps. It can give you alerts. It can even fix some of those gaps by itself. And so there are a lot of ways and kind of a lot of types of use cases within the HR and employee experience functions that we're looking at. The function specifically, as I mentioned, across HR operations, learning, recruiting, certainly for HR business partners as well, helping to enable that self-service, compensation and payroll, talent management and development. And you'll notice that there's not a specific call out for employee experience because I usually see employee experience as embedded in the responsibilities of all of these functions because employee experience is a multifunctional responsibility at most organizations. And sometimes it is a function within itself, but a lot of times it is embedded within all of these other functions. All right, so let's see. These are, and this will be a chart that has a lot on it, but this is what we have seen from the most popular or most often mentioned use cases that at least Forrester clients are thinking about and that they have a lot of questions about, and certainly intersecting with offerings from vendors. So I'm going to walk through this list. I'll go clockwise, starting with productivity. In terms of the productivity use cases, there are a lot of different offerings that help to identify and then suggest different ways that someone could boost their own productivity. It's hyper personalized, and that's one of the benefits that Gen AI brings. It can draw on what it knows about the particular user, so based on what data it can see of them, and then give specific recommendations for enhancing their well-being, like you need to take a break, or your calendar is very, very crowded between all of these kind of mode switching activities. You're trying to do some writing over here, but then you are interrupted by all of these meetings in 30-minute chunks. Let's recommend restructuring your calendar or creating different kind of calendar blocks so that you can have a free mind for writing, for example. Or it could even pick up on language that you're using in chat or email to say, hey, it looks like you need a little bit of a break. Why don't you go take a walk outside? Like, it can get so hyper personalized in that way. It can also give feedback, so it can serve up feedback, or it can consolidate or aggregate feedback and kind of even recognition that you've gotten from across the organization to say, here's some feedback that people have for you, or this is in general what impact you make on these relationships. It could even go so far as to make recommendations for you if it's trained and tuned correctly. But in terms of productivity and well-being, Gen AI can really serve as a partner, both from a well-being partner to kind of manage the balance and your kind of cognitive load, but it can also help point you in the right directions, and it can be very assistive as well. So this kind of co-pilot general assistant technology is very, very popular for good reason. There are a lot of co-pilots out in the market, and doing everything from, hey, write this email for me, find this information for me, do this thing, do that thing, or just find this document for me. Anything that typically might bring you a little bit of frustration in your employee experience, generative AI can help step in as long as it has access to the data that it needs and the documentation it needs, and as long as it's trained and tuned correctly, and that is built with the right meta prompts to behave in an ethical and responsible way, so not outside of its parameters. Augmented task and time management, I kind of already mentioned. The next section around the team management is a lot of the use cases for managers. So when you think about all of the time that managers take to either write performance reviews or even schedule people for tasks or shifts. When you think about how to have difficult conversations, as a manager, or having to step in with performance issues, Gen AI can help both trigger the alert that something needs to happen, coach you through whatever experience you need to have. And it can also help you with writing up or even giving advice on what to say in those interactions. So we see a lot of popular use cases being explored around both the kind of people management side of navigating difficult conversations, or even just highlighting where people things you could do to boost their performance and productivity, and also how to write a better performance management draft. Now, performance review creation, a note on this particular use case, it's very popular. People are already using a lot of the available tools to do it already, like ChatGPT or anything out available in the market. It's really important for this use case that you're using a tool that's actually trained on the right data. Gen AI can't help you write a better performance review if it doesn't know the person it's reviewing, if it doesn't see the feedback, if it's not tuned correctly to make sure that it's avoiding any biased language or any language that your organization feels is just not appropriate for including in a performance evaluation. None of these use cases are appropriate to be done without human oversight. So that human in the loop is really, really important for navigating these specific use cases, especially when you have team performance involved. When it comes to learning, Gen AI is really popular here, both from a learning content creation perspective. So that last bullet, certainly taking a lot of that burden and kind of time-consuming content creation effort from learning managers. And so they can spend their time more on what they were trained on doing, which is like managing the learning design and advising on how adults learn best, creating blended learning experiences that are sticky, that make an impact on the business. That's where learning wants to spend their time. And so rather than slogging through content creation and loading up courses and making sure they're SCORM wrapped and making sure that they're tagged appropriately, AI can take a lot of that burden as well. And it can also, on the back end, help to make sure that those meta descriptions are written correctly and accurately, that it's reviewing transcripts and tagging them appropriately with the right skills, managing the kind of back end, even from a learning management system back to the HCM or any other connected system, maybe like a talent marketplace or opportunity marketplace that needs to have that information about the skills and the kind of topics of the learning course. Gen AI can actually fit a lot of that capability, kind of take a lot of that capability. And so learning managers are now freed up for a lot more of the strategic activity, or like the time that they really want to spend given their expertise about adult learning. And also maintaining those relationships with the business, which is critical. Recruiting is the largest list that you can see here on the lower right hand. Recruiting use cases are extremely popular, not just because a lot of vendors are going into this space, but also because there's a lot of opportunity for productivity here in the recruiting space. When it comes to, drafting email templates or candidate search and matching, that AI algorithms can help based on the human input of the criteria for the decision. Of course, the algorithm can help make sure that those top candidates are visible to the recruiter. They can also make sure that Gen AI can also help with job descriptions, role profiles. It can help with some of the normalization across different job descriptions. Certainly, this is where the kind of skills-based organization when it comes to the recruiting and hiring use cases come in. And so it can help tag a job description with the right skills. It can certainly create interview guides for those hiring managers and teams based on whatever the job description has in it. It can help facilitate scheduling for interviews. It can even serve as a candidate companion in that, given the skills and the experience of a particular job candidate, it can actually recommend different jobs that they might be more qualified for. You can even have a conversational approach with them and can facilitate the application actually being filled out just through generative AI by a kind of conversational back and forth. Screening as well, interview coach too, so it can make sure the hiring manager is staying in compliance. It can serve up interview questions. Um, there is a use case around interview analysis that I'm not personally a fan of, in terms of and this is not necessarily generative AI, but using AI for facial recognition and speech recognition patterns to actually analyze someone's sentiment or their confidence level or anything like that in the context of an interview. It tends to go very wrong in many ways. And so that is a use case that I didn't put on the list because I don't love that use case yet. Maybe it will improve over time, but it's not yet ready for general kind of main stage, in my opinion. There's too much risk for it. But certainly, Gen AI can really help fit in, from a recruiting perspective, a lot of those areas where we always need more time. One of my favorites in this list for recruiting is just the back and forth that usually happens between the hiring manager and the recruiter in terms of agreeing on a job description. That use case, Gen AI can shave hours, if not days, and sometimes weeks off of that process, going back and forth between the recruiter and the hiring manager on agreeing on the ideal role description and job profile they want to upload to whatever they're using to market the open roles. As well, I love the use case of just based on a job description, write up specific interview questions so that you can really help the hiring manager, one, stay in compliance, but also you have consistency across the hiring teams to make sure that they are actually asking questions related to the job description and not falling into the kind of bias pit where we tend to hire people who are like us, based on affinity bias, et cetera, but we really stick to the data and the specific questions that are consistent and standard across the organization per that job role. For HR operations and payroll, there's a lot of the kind of back end that Gen AI can help with, certainly from form completion and management. So thinking about any of those onerous tasks around filling out forms, certainly during onboarding or any big changes in employee cycle, incident case summarization, so HR service delivery. There's a lot of possibility for Gen AI to come in to both summarize what's going on, help with escalations, maintain records of everything that's happened, and keep it all organized, and then also analyze it as well and help managers and leaders see particular patterns. Payroll error detection, this one is great as well. So just helping payroll be more strategic with their time and be more consultative as well, by taking on a lot of the kind of error detection and even some of the compliance use cases as well. Organizational search, virtual agent, this one is really big for employee self-service. Gen AI can really serve as that conversational chatbot that can just pull information based on the documents and policies that you upload. It can help with version control as well. And it resolves and reduces the amount of time that HR usually have to take in programming all of the responses. So they don't have to do that anymore, especially with enhanced search techniques and Gen AI, kind of how it's built. We can make sure that we are reducing the chances for hallucinations and making sure that the tools are pointing right towards the source and allowing those employees to kind of check the source documentation if they need to or want to. Rounding out the left side around team development, there's I love this use case around the development plan, the draft creation. And the reason why I said draft creation is that we don't want AI to just draft something and then publish it, right? We want to make sure, we need to make sure that we have human eyes in the loop on this, and making sure that even with IDPs, the individual development plans, that it can create a draft based on what it knows about the individual and their interests. But then the manager and the employee can sit down and make sure that they are working together to finalize it. But usually that is something that takes so much time that it never happens within organizations. And so allowing Gen AI to fill this use case need can actually make it makes it easier for the managers and the employees to actually have those conversations rather than spending the administrative time on creating that IDP draft, which rarely happens. So now AI can step in and create a draft, and then the manager and employee can just sit down during their normal one-on-one and talk about the career paths, the career goals, especially if there are any other use cases in the mix around career pathing, coaching, and guidance. AI can step in and actually make suggestions, and kind of put in some advice or maybe some next steps that the employee could take, pointing them towards learning courses or mentorship opportunities, or other people in the organization who have taken a similar path that they might want to talk to. There's a ton that Gen AI can help kind of fill that gap that usually would have to be the managers taking the time to think about, well, who do I know in the organization? And they usually just have a limited view anyway. AI can see the entire organization and point people towards the right folks or the right employees who might have a story to share, which is part of that visibility and equity of opportunity value as well. Last but not least, talent intelligence. And this talent intelligence is certainly a buzzword right now in the market. I see it as talent intelligence being all of the information that an organization would need about an individual to see if they are ready, willing, and able to do any particular kind of work. So it includes your skills and knowledge. It includes your capacity, your energy level, your engagement levels. It also includes your aspirations and interests. Like, do I actually want to do this? Because we know all of those parameters really give a cohesive picture of, will this person be able to take on this work? Do they want to take on this work? So talent intelligence is a motion of people analytics, but it's also taking from all of these pieces and parts of data that we already collect across the enterprise. So it's sentiment analysis in terms of NLP, and taking in whatever from the employee experience and engagement surveys. It's making sure that we understand skills, so inferring skills from activities that people are doing, what they're working on, who they're working with, managing those skills. It's also, from an analytics use case, Gen AI can feed back and interpret some of the patterns that the data is showing, and it can make those interpretations and kind of tell that story. It can certainly help too from a co-pilot scenario of workforce planning, major data and analytics stories. So, taking data from different places to say, hey, could you actually interpret the employee sentiment and relate that to our revenue to see if there's any intersection and relationship between how people are feeling about their work and the revenue generation, right? So it's about taking some of those patterns that we might not think about and helping see if there is something there, which is very, very powerful from a kind of people analytics perspective, and also just from a like business analytics and business intelligence perspective overall. Finally, workforce planning, which is one of my favorite topics, is that AI, certainly as the fourth component of workforce planning, right? Build, buy, borrow, and bot, right? Because now Gen AI as a member of the workforce now can take on a lot of those tasks and responsibilities. AI can also help with workforce planning, right? So it can develop different scenarios, different cost analyses, given different ratios in your workforce. It can help you sense and infer and look at different skills and labor market insights externally, as well as doing some kind of pattern recognition of what's going on internally and make suggestions there. So these are some of the use cases that we've been discussing with clients that it's especially certain vendors have talked to us about, but that they are exploring internally in their teams. And as you can see, it's a big list. There's a lot of thought and a lot of consideration that goes into choosing which of these use cases you or any organization would want to take on. And that's part of the conversation around you have like deciding which AI use cases to leverage. It requires a very thoughtful approach that, and this is just a regular decision framework, but below each, I've made it very specific to kind of choosing the AI use cases, right? What's going on right now? What's the problem that we're trying to solve? What does our current state look like? What takes a lot of time? What could we offload? What is a repeatable transactional task that our people don't need to spend time on? We'd rather free up time to help them be more creative and strategic. Then what if, right? What would a solution to that particular problem look like? What existing capabilities do we have? What could we leverage? This is the kind of imagination. Hey, what could we do? Then funneling down, converging again on what works. So this is where you bring in conversations about risk, reward, cost and effort, time to value, your readiness, the benefits, and then paring down that list into what we could realistically do given what we have in scope. Then what now, right? So what do we want to do now? What's our readiness for change? How do we enable a successful rollout, et cetera? And this is important because, as I said before, the workforce is concerned about these Gen AI capabilities. We see about half, right? So only half of workers know when to question the results of an automated technology like AI, which is a skills question. We also have less than half of them saying that they're confident about their career path and that the organization has their overall employee experience in mind when choosing when to roll out these AI use cases. And so it's really, really important for HR to consider what are the impacts that AI is going to make. Unfortunately, they may not be ready for it because when we surveyed HR, it's about 2.5 years ago, almost 3 years ago now, AI was not on HR's radar of their priorities. You can see it's at the bottom here. HR technology, including AI and machine learning, only 28% of people told us it was in their list of priorities, and these are HR directors and above. We also asked them, where are you confident about your team's capabilities? Only less, it was 19% said that they were confident in their team's AI capabilities. And then finally, they weren't investing in those skills at the time either. So when we ask them, what skills are you prioritizing in the next 12 months? Again, AI and automation is at the bottom. So one, they weren't confident. It wasn't even in their kind of radar of priorities. And they also weren't investing in the skills they needed. We're actually redoing this particular survey this year, actually right now. And I'm excited to see how those numbers might have changed because we're asking the same question so we can see a kind of year-over-year shift and change. So what we see is, I think I want to show you this in particular here. When you look at all of the priorities, and then when you look at where the confidence is, as you can see, the top, this top layer, this top response is compliance. That to me speaks to this almost the bifurcation and the distance between the two roles of HR and how they need to come together to enable AI success. Because on the first hand, HR compliance is extremely important, and it serves to the left-hand side of HR's role, the kind of protector role, right? HR as the protector of the employer, the protector of the organization overall, who cares about compliance and risk mitigation, more cautious part of the role. Whereas on the right-hand side, we see also the expectation to enable growth and to be a champion of the workforce and to help the workforce and build employee experience. And it's not to say that one side needs to win out overall. It's that actually AI success requires both of those roles equally to come together so that you as an HR professional can balance the safety need and the kind of risk mitigation and compliance need to make sure that you're leveraging AI appropriately, responsibly, ethically, with transparency, but also that you're thinking about an experimentation approach, that you're willing to test and learn. Because, especially because of AI's nature, we can't always rely on proven, tested best practices in the HR function anymore. The world of IO psychology is also going through a major transformation because of AI and because of the changing nature of AI, and making sure that we can maintain a level of groundedness in the research, but also allowing for a spirit of experimentation. And so both of these postures, both of these kind of skill set mindsets need to come together. And I was having a conversation to this point with a leader of talent management at a big telecom company. And she was talking all about helping her team almost learn to love the problem. That you learn to love the problem and you iterate and you help the technology improve over time, which is what AI needs. It needs training and tuning and use to make it better. But if we sit out on the sidelines and waiting for things to be perfect, we will miss out on a lot. And since nothing is perfect ever, we live in an imperfect universe. AI is the same way. It will never be perfect. We'll never land on a 100% perfection. And so if you are sitting out or waiting for at least some kind of signal of perfection or readiness, the world will actually pass you by. And so you have to at least be willing to get into the game, to start leading and experimenting, using your skills, both from a compliance side and risk mitigation, but also recognizing business value and business growth and embracing more of the experimentation as well. So that's all I had to share with you all, just going through where we are with Gen AI, why it's scary, but also very exciting in the world of HR. And then almost challenging you to think about how you can be thoughtful, but also, experiment and be willing to kind of learn as you go as well in this new world of Gen AI.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So I'm thinking about some key phrases here, and the one that really stuck for me with me was built, buy, borrow, and bought. I don't know. I mean, that kind of really kind of summarizes the fourth option that you have.
Mhm.
It's a new kind of tool that has emerged, and you got to factor that into your equation, without which the equation is not balanced anymore, right? If you want to balance the equation, you got to bring the bot into the equation. That's so interesting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. The questions have started to come in from the attendees. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. And meanwhile, well, as I'm asking you questions, we are also going to run two questions for the attendees. So my team will run a couple of questions which are going to pop up at everyone's screen. And if you don't mind, please please answer those questions. So for you, the first question that I have is, Betsy, what do you what do you think about the first use cases, right? So there are a lot of use cases, and you went into great detail into each one of them and what that means, right? What do you think is your sense will be the first few obvious one with which organizations can get started, and that will set to a good success?
Mhm. Yeah, there are a few across different functions that have already kind of started running, that people are starting to run with. Certainly, any of the use cases that are more risk, especially with kind of employment decisions as well. There are many organizations who are still kind of making sure they have everything they need from a readiness and from a value perspective before they kind of go into those use cases. But the ones that are quite popular, at least from what I'm hearing, is more around the employee self-service, kind of the kind of chat bot experience. And then also from the talent management, talent development side, creating individual development plans, or even kind of bring your own AI, people doing that, leveraging their own personal AI, is figuring out like, what are the career paths available? What are the skills I need to learn? Um, there are some low-hanging fruit ones around like job descriptions that I mentioned that are very popular, but it comes with a prerequisite usually of doing some job architecture rework. So looking at the state of your data and role architecture, and certainly AI can help with that and make recommendations for kind of cleaning up that data and consolidating your role profiles. But all of these use cases come with their own set of prerequisites, as you know, like the data cleanliness, and we always talk about garbage in, garbage out, just making sure that people kind of have that in mind when they think about choosing the use cases to take on. Like, what are the prerequisites for those use cases working really well?
No, absolutely. You got to be methodical in these things. So, absolutely agreed. So, what I'm going to do is there are more questions which have come in, but I'm going to uh, present three or four ideas to people, and then we're going to come back to the questions, and then we are going to wrap up. So,
Great.
if it's okay, I'm going to share my screen, and so I'm going to take people through, how we see the life is going to change for people, right? How the jobs are going to change for people. Suzanne, who's a senior HR coordinator, this is how her day looks like right now, most likely. She comes in, starts with a huge inbox, mailbox somewhere, which has maybe 73 emails lined up. She has to go through the emails, cannot go through all of them, does around 30 emails or so, and most of the time the answers are referring to some policy or something like that. Responding, it's information, right? It's information that she has and she can get to, but apparently others can get to, right? At around 12:30, and she hopes she has done 30 emails. She's hoping the others will get to the rest of the emails in her team, right? uh, and hopefully they will, but if they don't, then there's a possible potential of delay. At 12:30, the manager checks in with her and says, "Hey, I requested you for a policy update and modification. Were you able to get that done?" And she says, "Well, I really didn't have time. I'm so buried with a lot of things that I'm working on." um, you know, and then she starts doing her work, but she's getting interrupted with a lot of phone calls which are coming in on the things, because people are just making a phone call and saying, I have this issue, I have that issue. At around 3:30, she really receives a serious complaint, which is about a sexual harassment, and this is something that can impact, the company. Like you said, she has to come into that protector mode, both for the employee and for the company. But as she's working through it, ideally she'd like to go and meet the person and so on and so forth. But as she's working through it, again, she gets interrupted. And she leaves at around 6:30, and when she's wrapping up her day, she has the nagging feeling that, I couldn't accomplish enough today. And I meet with a lot of HR people pretty much every day, and I do get that sense that HR folks are really overwhelmed with the amount of work and the transactions that are built in, that must be done every day. But really, we are not equipped to handle so many transactions, so everyone feels as if they are a little bit behind. Now, the situation can change though, and I think this is how it is going to change for most people. You are going to find less number of tickets to begin with, right? You're going to come, you're not going to look at the mailbox, you're going to look at your ticketing system, a case management solution. It will have only, for example, 17 cases, right? Why? Because the rest of the cases were already handled by Gen AI. And these were simpler cases that didn't need a whole lot of human touch, and they were already deflected by Gen AI. Great. Not only that, the tickets and cases were prioritized by Gen AI. Gen AI is telling you which cases are likely to blow up, which are more important, which are less important, so that you can actually work on the tickets and the cases which are really important. Then third, you are now have time and bandwidth. You are looking at the pulse of the employee. You're trying to find, and where's this pulse of the employee coming from? From Gen AI based analytics, right? You talked about talent intelligence earlier. Very similar kind of scenario of Gen AI based intelligence can be deployed all across, and you can really get, insights on survey, insights on what kind of questions people are asking, insights on where the pain point and frustration is coming from, what kind of issues are creating most negative feelings in the employees. You will have all this information right at your fingertips with the Gen AI solution. Given that you're doing all that, now when you do a policy updation, you can do a much better job. Why? Because you have much better insights on what is happening with the customers and the employees. You're not just making a policy, but you're making a policy and updation because you have better insights. You can actually focus on the key issues, issues that need really significant attention. For example, the sexual harassment case that I was talking about, you can actually invest the time and energy there. You are not going to get interrupted. You can actually allocate 2 hours. You can do proper due diligence and work in that case, instead of just doing the best you could. And obviously your employee engagement goes through the roof. You really have a sense of what is going on with the employees, not only through the Gen AI based analytics, but also by the fact that you can now actually spend time with the employees. And then you leave, by the end of the day you're feeling much more accomplished than earlier. So the point I'm trying to make is that AI can make a difference on what you accomplish through the day. You're still going to spend time. There's a lot of work going on in HR. That work needs to be done. But everyone is looking for a strategic shift where HR can start playing the role of revenue, almost a revenue generator, right? And a great protector. And I think Gen AI can kind of help make that shift to a lot of people. This was the coordinator perspective, but if you look from a perspective of an employee, things change for them as well, right? As an employee earlier, you had fragmented support channels, but now you have, maybe you just need to go to Teams to get help. Earlier, you didn't have access to knowledge and policies, but now you do, right? You can just ask any complex question. Earlier, you had to wait on the phone calls to get the help, but now you don't, because there's ways, and the pressure on HR has gone down. Even if, God forbid, you have to make a phone call, someone can pick up that phone call much faster, because they're not buried under tons of transactional stuff. Your onboarding experience was much more likely to be poor, which is, by the way, goes across the customers. But now you can have a fantastic onboarding experience. Your expectations from HR were low. This is so true, and this point I wrote from my heart, because in general, our expectation from HR we have reduced over a period of time. We don't expect much from HR as employees, but I do think that that can change, right? Employees, we can again raise our expectation from HR in terms of what HR can do for you. And therefore HR will become a meaningful part of the journey of employee experience throughout the company. A little bit about Rezolve.ai. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time, but we are a HR operations product. which is based on smart Gen AI and basically presents a case management, knowledge management, generative AI based knowledge management, live chat, task automation, and process automation, all built into the platform. So you don't have to go look at multiple platforms to do the same thing. It starts at generative AI based features and ends at even case management and knowledge management. Very simple to use, easy for employees, easy for HR, not as complex as some of these larger products that are out there. And finally, it basically integrates with all the HR systems as well. So we believe in being a team player in the ecosystem of applications, and therefore we integrate with pretty much all the other applications out there. Now, one last thing I want to go, and then we're going to go to question mark. What is going to happen in future, right? Things are moving so fast. What does it mean? We already talked about Gen AI based, analytics. I think two more things that you can see, which are pretty much on the horizon. One is Gen AI's ability to read or create images. Read images is very important. You can give it an image and you can read it and figure out how to answer questions about it. And Gen AI's voice capabilities. These are two things that you can expect to come shortly. And when I say shortly, in next 3 to 6 months, and coming out in products such as ours. And what does it mean? I mean, it all means that the evolution that we are going through is just going to continue. It's not going to stop. So we got to, if you are on board with the evolution, we will create a new organization of a new type, and it will help everyone in the organization, including us. So that's where I'm going to pause. Um, I'm going to ask a few questions. I think, Betsy, you have been answering some of the questions, right?
Yes, I have.
Can you summarize the answers for folks a little bit that you have been given?
Yeah, so there was one question here around how can we ensure our employees feel supported during the shift to Gen AI? And what I wrote, and for everyone, is to engage them as much as possible in the process of wherever you are in the process, either deciding or implementing or learning from or testing, improving, etc. Engaging people in the process will of course do at least two things. One, it will help resolve a lot of the feelings of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that people get when they lose control, right? When they don't have agency over what is happening, people tend to react negatively to that.
Mhm.
No one likes being told what to do, and no one likes being left out of major decisions. And so you want to co-create or engage them as much as possible. I wrote just like soliciting ideas, getting feedback about their experience, and also allowing more time for training than you had originally planned. I'm seeing a lot of kind of one and done training, maybe like an e-learning course across the entire organization. That's just not enough for how we want people to use AI. And so we want to really think about it from an adult learning perspective. What's really going to help them make it stick? And so that engaging them is going to be the kind of general overarching theme for anything in terms of how they want to feel supported. Generally, based on our data, employees feel less supported than leaders think they are being, right? There's always that disconnect and delta between the two. And so the guidance is just to do more than you think. People always think they're communicating, and the impact is that they're actually communicating less than they think they are. So just try to do that over communication, kind of from a change leadership perspective, making sure that the why is very clear for people, what's in it for them. Why are we doing this? Why is it important for each individual to subscribe and enroll in this process?
There's another question about how can we measure the success of Gen AI, and I think if I can take a shot at that, you got to have your metrics. Outcomes have to be defined up front, right? You should be able to say, if I do this, this is what I'm expecting to happen, right? As long as you define that, and there are a lot of things that you can define, right? I have written extensively about it. I mean, Betsy, I'm sure you have written about it. But you walk into anything, you got to define what is the outcome that I'm expecting, and if you do that, then you're okay.
Yeah, and I think too, adding to that is distinguishing between your leading versus lagging indicators. So what outcomes are you expecting down the line? But what are the activity metrics or the things that our team can influence to make sure that we are more successful down the line? And a lot of those things might change because Gen AI, you're going to be learning a lot more, and we are all going to be learning a lot more about its capabilities and what it's able to achieve. And so keeping an open mind on like what's happening, what kind of benefits are we seeing, what costs are we seeing as well, like does it take too much time or effort to do this? You want to really just kind of keep an open mind of the entire balance sheet of Gen AI.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I have one last question to ask you. Sometimes IT and HR are not on the same page, and in the buying process, sometimes it can be difficult, right? HR wants to do something, IT is not on board, or IT wants to do. Any suggestion here for the organizations to kind of, get in sync?
Yeah. IT and HR are they're like best friends that don't know they should be best friends. Um, we see shadow IT happening all the time where all the functions are buying their own tech. We see shadow HR happen where different functional leaders are doing things that actually HR should be doing. So they're just defining their own way for performance management and recruiting.
Mhm.
But what we really want to have happen is that they can vet tools or strategies together because they're both bringing very critical expertises that they need to share almost further upstream together so that when HR sees a potential for technology or a tool to help deliver a capability, they need to start talking to IT almost immediately to think about like, how are we doing this now? How would you suggest we do it given our current tech stack? How do we make sure that we are doing it more seamlessly from an employee experience standpoint, both digitally and also just the sentiment overall? And then IT as well needs HR weighing in on how it's going to impact engagement, retention, sentiment, employee experience. And so those conversations actually need to happen way
Yeah.
earlier than just when you get down the road to selecting a tool, because you need to be in lockstep together with as representatives of the same organization. It's not an us versus them, which sometimes it is. Sometimes it
Yeah.
happens to be that way, but it needn't be an us versus them.
Yeah, exactly. And I would say that IT HR is a integral part of any buying process nowadays, right? Because HR will be using the products that you buy for your enterprise. After IT, HR is the next biggest, use case or buyer of the product. So when IT is buying it, it'll be great if they can get HR inputs right up front rather than going and happening the other way. So I think there's definitely some scope for, and that's my recommendation to all the people here that, do that, have that conversations, and they'll really help you through the buying process to simplify it. Well, we are towards the end of the time. We actually went a little bit over. Betsy, so much. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. What a wonderful insights and data-driven insights. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.